My name is Frank Schwartz. Now I'm joined here with my imaginary partner, Scott Kalish. He's going to come out in a second. I'm the principal lead for Cloud Ops. I lead the Cloud Ops competency, and you may ask yourself why a Cloud Ops guy is talking about sustainability. But as we hopefully are going to show you in this presentation is that it's all about observing what you're doing, what we're doing in the cloud that actually has a direct impact on emissions. As one of our leaders very smartly said, the greatest energy is the energy that you don't use. So the way that customers are using the resources and how efficient you're using the resources in the cloud has a direct impact on sustainability and on the emissions that we are emitting from AWS and from the cloud. And again, you may be familiar with this, but we have come up with this shared responsibility model for sustainability. And we've got three different categories here. So it's sustainability in the cloud, it's the sustainability off the cloud, and it's now also sustainability through the cloud. And through the cloud basically means using AWS resources to solve climate problems. I'm not going to focus on that at all today. Sustainability off the cloud is essentially our responsibility in AWS to run our data centers efficiently, to run the code that runs in our data set, to use the most sustainable code possible for running our data centers. And then the most amount of time that we're going to spend today is how customers are using resources in the cloud for driving sustainability in the cloud. So I'm not going to go too much into off the cloud, but you may already know, or how many of you guys know about the climate pledge that AWS went into in 2019? You know, one person. Very interesting, very ambitious goal that we set ourselves for being 100% renewable driven by the end of next year, being water positive by 2030, which means that we're giving more water back into the community that we're actually consuming, and that we're going to be net zero on new carbon by 2040. Again, there's a lot of content out there. I don't want to go too much into it. I want to spend a little bit more time to talk about sustainability in the cloud. And to kind of get our mental model going, you may recognize the colors from this scheme here, but essentially customers are trying to use services efficiently. We're trying to architect and making those services and where those services run more efficient in order to optimize our outputs, our carbon outputs, our emissions. And to go a little bit more into depth here, I want to show how this can be looked at. The output metrics as cost is a very simple equation. You use more services for AWS or you use less services for AWS, and each service has a price. On the emissions side, however, it's a little bit more complicated, and actually calculating the scope 1 and scope 2, which basically means the direct emissions and the emissions that we're using through energy purchases, how to calculate them is a little bit more complicated, and it requires to actually take into consideration how our data centers are run, what kind of energy we're using in the data centers, and come up with a good calculation to put this together. We are committed to giving you that kind of information, and because we have that information, we provide it through our carbon footprint tool. Who has used this tool before in the console? Anybody? One? It's a cool tool. I definitely recommend you to look at it. It has the direct emissions out there. You can slice and dice it in a lot of different ways. You can export it to analyze it. You can go on a payer level or even on an individual level, and you can also forecast the energy consumption, or not the energy, the emissions that your specific usage of AWS actually emits in the cloud. The shortfall of this one is that the data that's available in this tool is available 3 months after you're actually using the resource. Because it's very complicated, because we want to be accurate on it, and especially talking about observability, if you tell me that, use the resource and I'll tell you how you're doing it 3 months later, is not necessarily that good. So I recommend using this for overall goal setting for a larger company and for keeping track of your direct carbon emissions. But on a granular level, to measure your output more granular and more real time, it's a lot easier to look at consumption by cost. But moving a little bit forward, not just looking at the output metrics of cost in our cost usage report, I also want to encourage people to look at the input metrics, right? So the service consumption and the cost usage reports tells you the service consumption of your AWS resources, but then also what are the operational processes that go into using these services, and what are the business needs that actually are required or that drive those needs. And in order to manage this a little bit more easy for every team that is running AWS resources, we recommend for our customers to use a thing that we call sustainability key performance indicators. And those sustainability key performance indicators have proven very successful for essentially calculating the usage of your resources and then also making that relative in terms of what's the unit of work. Like, how much resources do you use for every insurance policy contract that you're selling? How much usage of work, how much resources do you use for every connected vehicle mile you're driving? So essentially kind of keeping track of the resource consumption basis the unit of work or the business units that your particular business is consuming. And some of the metrics here is, of course, our resource usage in AWS, but then also on the business metrics you can have number of users or the metrics that I just talked about. And I already talked about the cost and usage report. I hope all of you guys are familiar with it. But if you look on from a metric side, as these proxy metrics, and this is where the Cloud Ops view comes in, is CloudWatch logs, right? Creating more efficiently used environments by observing what is going on in those environments. And just to show a couple of good ones that we have used with our customers for driving these sustainability KPIs, a lot of these are CloudWatch metrics. You're probably familiar with most of them, but these are the metrics that flowed into one of the examples that I wanted to give here that we have done with TUI, that is a travel provider where I come from in Germany, that process a lot of flights per day, and we have been able to reduce some of their compute resources by about 40%, and not just by giving one number, but giving one sustainability KPI to every team that owns an application within TUI. So everybody is kind of made it very easy for them to look at their sustainability KPIs and reduce their overall resource consumption. So that's one example. We have a lot more on the tool side and kind of contextual information, and I'm going to hand over to Scott to jump into the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Frank. Everybody hear me? Good? Thanks. So thanks everybody for coming. Happy to be here. So Frank introduced myself, but Scott Kellish. I'm a senior partner SA and I'm the worldwide tech lead for cloud operations in the partner org. And along with Frank, I own the technical aspects of the cloud operations competency that we launched last year in April. So before I kind of get into some of the partner aspects of sustainability, I just want to kind of take a green. Sorry about that. Kind of take a step back, right? Because there's a close correlation between what we see in terms of cost optimization and then the topic of sustainability. So, we typically, have these conversations with customers where we see them migrating workloads from on-prem, and they bring that traditional data center mentality with them. So what that means is that they migrate a workload. They don't really enable the workload to take advantage of elasticity, the agility of the cloud, and they really don't have any true visibility into what their cost is, right? So they don't have any sort of tagging structure in place. They really don't know, for the amount of money that they're spending to host a workload in the cloud, what is the real value that they're deriving out of that? And at the end of the day, they really just have this bill they get once a month, and that, we've all heard the term sticker shock, and that ends up being a real source of contention. And a lot of the reasons that we introduced the cloud operations competency and then the well-architected partner program and other tactics I'll talk about in a second. But we want to, as we work with customers and we want them to kind of break this cycle, right? It's not about reducing your bill at the end of the month. It's about optimizing your cost. And what that really means is making sure, that the resources that you've deployed for a given workload are properly optimized to deliver whatever business value at whatever sort of KPIs, whether it's performance or what have you, that you have the right resources deployed, and that just because your bill goes up month over month, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The idea here is to be able to drive down the cost of delivering the business functionality to users. And part of the cloud operations competency is validating customer partners around cloud, cost management. And if you think about the FinOps maturity model, as you get into those higher levels of maturity, there's this concept of unit cost, right? So getting customers to understand, instead of thinking about, what is my bill every month, is like, what am I really spending? What's it really costing me to deliver some sort of business value to customers, and then being able to drive that down. So what does good look like? All right, so as you see here, the AWS spend month to month is going up and down. The last 3 months, March to May, it's going up. Customers who are still working this kind of traditional on-prem mentality, that's a bad thing, and they sit there and they strive to lower that bill. But in reality, customers that have started to adopt this FinOps mindset, and are thinking about it from what is the cost to deliver functionality to customers, if that unit cost that's heading downwards, that's going in the right direction. That's what we should be thinking about. Now, if you see your bill going up and you haven't had any change in business, right? The number of users that you're serving, the number of whatever the business value that you're delivering isn't increasing, that's obviously a problem, right? But if your bill is going up, that should not, immediately be a bad thing. You really need to understand, what is the cost for me to deliver a unit of value to customers, and in the long term, am I driving that down? If it's going down, either because you've optimized the environment or because your business is actually growing, that's a great thing. That's what we want. So when we think of from a cost optimization perspective, there's really these kind of 3 drivers that we have that we work with customers on, right? So right sizing, right? So making sure that you're using the right size instances, the right capacity of resources, in order to be able to deliver against the KPIs that you've developed, as such as the performance you want to be able to deliver. Scheduling, right? So making sure that resources are available, when they're needed, and not consuming or generating costs when they're not needed, right? So this is either going to be scheduling EC2 and RDS instances to stop and start at the appropriate time, leveraging auto scaling or elasticity to be able to react to changes in demand in real time. And then lifecycle policies, right? So this is going to be things like, we don't want to be keeping data forever, right? We should only be, using storage for data that's actually, providing business value. So lifecycle policies to be able to either move data, if it's an S3, off to a tiered storage level, or deleting data its useful life has come to an end. So, these are the 3 kind of, levers that we work with customers, to help them understand, how can they go about being able to tune their environment. And obviously these are kind of like, gross mechanisms that customers can use, beyond just going and completely re-architecting a workload, for example. And then when we talk about sustainability, then it's really about these things that we're doing to optimize the cost of our environment. They inherently are then going to drive down the energy, or improve the efficiency, the energy efficiency that we're using, right? So if we're not running, EC2 instances 24/7, but we're spinning them up and down as needed, right? That's energy that's not being spent, right? If we're not sitting there and, keeping data forever, we're deleting it after, a period of time, that's appropriate. Again, that's storage, that's carbon emissions that aren't being spent on our behalf. right? So there's this correlation between being able to lower the cost of delivering your workload and then the energy efficiency that then results from not using those services, whether you're not using compute, you're not using storage, you're not using as much network. Being able to develop that balance, so that you're delivering capabilities based on your actual needs, not what we did on-prem where we bought all the hardware, for whatever the peak demand was going to be. So one of the things that we have available, and you should all be familiar with this, is the well-architected framework. So in 2021 at reInvent, we introduced the sixth pillar of the framework for sustainability. And it's a set of best practices like the other 5 pillars that allow, guide customers in being able to optimize their workloads in order to be able to maximize energy efficiency. Right? Again, along those same lines that we talked about for reducing costs, things that you can do both at a tactical level as well as an overall higher architectural level to be able to drive down, improve the energy efficiency, which then in turn ends up lowering your carbon consumption. So 2 QR codes here, Cloud Operations Competency Program and then the Well-Architected Partner Program. So, with the Cloud Operations Competency Program, it's all about validating partners, so it's open to consulting and NISV partners, but in particular for the consulting partners, validating partners who are able to help customers across what we call the 5 solution areas of cloud operations. Right, so governance, cost management, monitoring observability, compliance and auditing, and then operations management. And this really came about because we continue to hear, from customers that, they migrated their first workload to AWS, and they think it was successful, and then that bill came the next month, and suddenly they're in sticker shock. Or they went and they migrated their first workload successfully. On the heels of that, they went to migrate the second one and ran into a wall because they didn't think about things like logging should be a common concern, that it can be used as a centralized resource rather than being re-implemented for every application. So we want customers to think about all 5 solution areas, at least be aware of the decision points that they have as they go through and start building out the cloud environment. So the competency program validates consulting partners who can help them with that. Similarly, for well-architected, we have a well-architected partner program where those partners are able to go in and help customers evaluate their workloads against the well-architected best principles, now including the sustainability pillar, and help them be able to improve the efficiency and overall design and operation of their workloads. And in between the 2 programs, we have over 100 partners that we have validated now that are available, to help customers, around the world. So a couple of the tools, things that are available to customers, right? So obviously Trusted Advisor to be able to identify kind of low-hanging fruit, if you will, in terms of things that customers can be doing in their environment. Compute Optimizer for being able to go in and help customers make right-sized recommendations on their resources based on what's already running. The well-architected framework. And 2 things, they really want, customers to be aware of as they're going through this journey, both in optimizing the workloads, across all of the pillars, but sustainability as well, is for them to be resource efficient, right? So using things like right-sizing the resources, so EC2 instance sizes, RDS, using the latest generation Graviton 3 processors, right, that are going to deliver up to 60% more energy efficient than the likewise EC2 instance. And then impact aware really means building in visibility into your workload so that you understand, what resources are being used, what the utilization level is, and then being able to use that data to then go and as you take a look at the various tactics that are available for improving both cost optimization and sustainability, to be able to evaluate, are these tactics working and what sort of adjustments should be made. So just kind of, a couple other things that we have. Frank already talked about the carbon footprint tool. Currently today delivers Scope 1 and Scope 2 information. We're working hard to be able to deliver Scope 3, at some point in the future. I talked about the sustainability pillar, Graviton instances, EC2 spot instances as well, right? Requires an architectural change, right? Not all workloads can necessarily leverage those, but it's a great way to be able to leverage spare resources that AWS has at significant cost savings. And again, we're driving down, we're improving that energy efficiency by only using things when they actually are needed. And then the AWS Data Exchange, right? So pretty much every enterprise company out there today, especially ones that have signed on to the carbon pledge, need to be able to report their carbon consumption, right? So there's a whole bunch of data that's available here that customers can use to help them understand, what is their actual carbon footprint, right? So in lieu of us actually providing, scope 3 data as part of the footprint today, customers can use some of this data to build kind of a proxy, if you will, to understand and be able to report what their carbon footprint and consumption is.
I have a question actually. How many of you have read the white paper for the sustainability pillar? No? It's actually a really good read. So if you take anything away from this, I think there's a lot of different tools that we can help you with on sustainability. But take a peek at the white paper for sustainability in the well-architected framework, and play around with the carbon footprint tool. I think both of it is quite insightful and highly recommended. So if you haven't done that. So I think this concludes.
Just two more things I just want to mention real quick. So if you're getting ready to migrate a workload to AWS from on-prem, we have our migration evaluation tool. It now supports and enables you to request a sustainability assessment. So as part of that tool, it will go through and give you an estimate of what your carbon consumption is for a workload on-prem, what the equivalent workload would look like in AWS, and allow you to understand, what would the carbon potential savings be by migrating that workload into AWS. And then lastly, you should all be familiar with the AWS Solutions Library. So we have a lot of partners that have delivered solutions specifically around sustainability. And you can go to the library, and check out, those solutions that are available, both for helping customers improve their own carbon footprint, but then also partners that are able to help with carbon reduction outside of AWS, right? So think, building sustainability, for example, right? So there's a tremendous number of partners and solutions that are available in the solution library as well to help with that. So that concludes our presentation.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a lot more we could talk about. Of course, this was just a lightning talk. This could fill a lot more time, but catch us after this. Happy to discuss more. And yeah, check out those tools that we discussed. Thanks.
Thank you.